Hey everybody, welcome in. Tonight we're going to be talking about prison profit economy. And basically what this is kind of the last episode of the Accomplice murder series that we've been doing based on the original story of Charles Sonny Burton. So let's go ahead and jump in and see where this evening takes us, shall we? Initially, I thought Burton's case would end when the sentence did. One man, one conviction, one story about a law that can turn prisons into murder. I thought once we walked through that, we'd close the door and move on. But that's not what happened. Because after we finished that episode, after we talked about a man who never pulled the trigger but still carried the weight of a murder conviction, something shifted for me. Not because of the courtroom, not in the statute of the law, but in the afterlife of the conviction. I started thinking about what happens next. What happens to the other men involved? Where people go after the judge stands up and the gavel drops? Where the state sends them? Who runs those places? Who profits from them? And what it actually means to disappear someone into a system most of us never see. Prisons, jails, ICE detention centers. The whole back end of our justice system, the part that doesn't make headlines, the part we're not supposed to look at too closely. And once I started looking at it, I couldn't stop. Because it turns out the story doesn't end with the sentence. It doesn't end with guilt or with innocence. It doesn't even end with the crime. There's an entire world behind that door. A world of private companies, contracts, fees, fines, and quiet incentives that will shape what punishment looks like long after the courtroom lights go dark. A world where communication costs money, where food costs money, where staying warm costs money, where staying human costs money. A world where families, mothers especially, carry the bill for a system they didn't choose and can't control. So today we're not talking about the front end of justice, we're talking about the machinery that's behind it. The part that keeps turning long after the headlines fade. The part that tells us who we really are when no one's watching. Welcome back to the space between. Before we go any further, I want to ground us in something really important. This episode, it's not about politics. It isn't about taking sides or assigning blame. It's about people, real people, and the systems that shape their lives in ways most of us never see. And maybe that's the thing we'll learn together most through this podcast, through this practice of viewing things from the center, is that things are so much deeper than an initial reaction might indicate. Which is why we respond instead of react. So as you listen, I invite you to stay open, stay curious, and stay with me in that middle place, the place where nuance lives, where humanity lives, and where understanding begins, and where it's okay to question things. So the question. The truth is, there are 48 states in our union that allow some version of the rule that was used to convict Burton. 48 states where a person can be sentenced for a murder they didn't commit, didn't plan, and in some cases, didn't even know what was happening. And once you see that, the center of you has to ask, why? Why do we allow that? What is the gain? Because it's not just Burton. There are so many stories like his, stories where the law stretches its responsibility so far, it stops even resembling the truth. And when you start asking why, you end up in a place most people never look. The incentives behind the law. Not the moral incentives, not the legal incentives, the structural ones. The ones that shape the system quietly from the inside. So let's go back and, I like to go back in history and kind of tell you how things started. Everything has a beginning, a middle, and an end. That's what we talked about at the very first of doing this podcast, is that we want to be in that middle place because the story doesn't isn't just the beginning and it's not the end. It's all the things that happen in the middle, right? So here we are looking at the beginning of how we came to these felony murder laws. They didn't start here. They're old English common law, centuries old, created in a world with fewer crimes, fewer weapons, and a state that wanted a simple way to punish group violence. The idea was straightforward. If you join a dangerous felony and someone dies, you're responsible, even if you didn't kill them. When the United States adopted English common law, we inherited the doctrine wholesale. And instead of narrowing it as our system evolved, most states actually expanded it. Why? Because it was useful. It made prosecution easier. It made plea deals easier. It made long sentences easier. And in a country that's always been a little more comfortable with punishment than with complexity, easy has a way of sticking. The incentives. Here's the part that's a little bit harder to talk about. Felony murder laws, they don't survive because they're fair. They survive because they're efficient. They allow prosecutors to secure long sentences without proving intent. They increase leverage in plea negotiations. We talked about that last week, where maybe if you tell somebody that they're going to get the death penalty, suddenly a 40-year sentence looks a lot more appealing to them in a plea negotiation. They reduce trial time. They produce predictable outcomes, long sentences. But there's another layer, and it's the one we rarely talk about out loud. Longer sentences create more revenue. Every extra year someone spends behind bars is another year of per diem payments to private prison operators, guaranteed occupancy for state facilities, revenue for telecom companies, revenue for commissary vendors, revenue for medical subcontractors, revenue for the companies that run video visits, email, tablets, and money transfers. A long sentence isn't just a punishment, it's an economic asset. And the companies that benefit from that asset, the GEO groups, the core civics, the MTCs, the JPays, the secure uses, the Viapaths, they don't just operate inside prisons, they lobby and they donate and they shape the political weather around incarceration. Not by writing felony murder laws themselves, they don't have to. They just lobby for the conditions that make long sentences normal and predictable and politically safe. So let's follow the money. While all of this is happening, while corporations strengthen their contracts and lawmakers strengthen their positions, families are the ones paying the bill. Mothers especially. Mothers who are spending a conservative estimate of $5,000 a year just to keep their sons and daughters human. $5,000 for phone calls, video visits, messages, commissary, clothing, hygiene, the endless little fees that attach themselves to every part of incarceration. $5,000 for comfort, for connection, for the small, fragile thread that ties someone on the inside to someone on the outside. And some of these sons and daughters didn't even know a crime was happening. They were convicted under laws that treat proximity as guilt, presence as guilt, association as guilt. So when you step back, when you look at the whole picture, you start to see the circle. Longer sentences create more revenue. More revenue strengthens the corporations. Stronger corporations lobby for the laws and budgets that keep sentences long, and the cycle repeats. A circle of incentives, a circle of influence, a circle of injustice. And caught in the middle of that circle of families, ordinary people, carrying the emotional and financial weight of a system they didn't choose and can't control. As we close today, I keep coming back to this one truth. And the front end of our justice system is about guilt and innocence. The back end is about something else entirely. It's about time. It's about money. It's about the quiet incentives that shape lives long after the verdict is read. Because the reality is, longer sentences don't just punish, they fund things. They keep beds full, they keep contracts alive, they keep corporations profitable. And those corporations turn around and lobby the people who write the laws that keep those sentences long. So I'm left with this question, not as a critique, not as an activist, but as a person trying to stay centered in a world that makes that hard. What does justice mean if the people who benefit most from it are the ones who never serve a day? What does accountability look like when the burden falls on the families who had no part in the crime? And how do we keep pretending this is normal? I don't have the answers. But I do know this. Somewhere between the sentence and the cell, between the law and the life lived under it, there's a truth we have to be willing to look at, even when it's uncomfortable. And it is uncomfortable. I it's kind of mind-blowing to me that in 48 states in our country, you can be convicted of murder without murdering somebody. And you can get the death penalty for that murder without ever having murdered somebody. And you can say things like, excuse me, if you lean to the extremes, you could say, well, it's about the company you keep and blah, blah, blah. But I want to tell you a true story, about a case that was in Florida. And the gist of it went something like this. The guy and his buddies go out drinking one night. Now, this guy had let his buddies borrow his car previously. So they're all a little intoxicated, probably, whatever. He drives home, they're all at his house. They're intoxicated, saying drunk, stupid things like drunk, stupid people tend to do. And maybe mention that they were going to go rob somebody for some weed and cash. Excuse me. Drunk guy says he's drunk and he's going to go pass out. Well, let us borrow your car. Okay, whatever. They borrow his car, which again they had done several times before. He passes out. They go commit this crime. Someone ends up dying in this crime. And the guy who's sleeping in a house far away gets charged with murder because they borrowed his car. It's stories like that. Could he have known 100% that they were really going to go kill somebody? Have you ever been in a car with somebody and you see an armored car and you're like, oh, we should rob that armored car? I've had that happen. I know several people who've had it. Nobody does it, don't get me wrong. I haven't ever been part of an armored car robbery, but what I'm saying is that people say stuff, right? And it's just a perfect example of how you can get caught up in situations and end up on death row. And that's scary. It's scary. And it's pretty wild, right? I don't know, guys. That's the end of our Charles Burton series and the series on Accomplice murder. It's been a lot. Like I said, there's a lot more cases out there. Interestingly, I can't tell you how many people, as much as I would love to tell you how many people are currently or have been incarcerated underneath this law. There's not really any record keeping for that. You heard me right. There's no record keeping for that. There's probably a reason. Anyway, that's where I'll leave you. I'll see you guys next time. Stay grounded, stay safe, stay yourself. Bye.